Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks. On this week's video, I'm going to be talking all about feel and ultimately, what is it? So this journey started for me about 2 weeks ago, I guess, when an Instagram page called Guitars Daily were kind enough to repost one of my videos to their page. Now, Guitars Daily having a few 100,000 followers, this post was automatically going to attract a little bit more attention, I guess, than your typical Instagram post. However, it was the purposely polarising, shall we say, quote attached to the video that really elicited the big response. That being, whoa, this guy has so much feel. Now, if you're a regular watcher of Friday Fretworks, you may have well already seen this clip before, but if you haven't, it sounds a little bit like this. Now, being Instagram, or being the internet, I should probably say, as you can appreciate, with such a polarising, inflammatory quote attached to the video, it really elicited a big response. And those responses, generally speaking, fell into one of two camps. Number one, do I have feel? And number two, more interestingly to me, what is feel anyway? And that really got me thinking about the fact that feel is one of these slightly vague, generic, enigmatic terms that we are very quick to bandy around in the guitar world and generally speaking attached to our favourite players. And looking at it from an entirely personal point of view, a lot of my favourite players that I would maybe attach this feel bracket to are from very kind of different ends of the spectrum, through kind of more maybe shred stuff through to acoustic players. So it really got me thinking in regard to, are there any specific attributes that you would sort of associate with feel players? Or is it entirely a case of one man's meatloaf is another man's poison? And it is purely subjective, as most music is. So to try and get to the bottom of this, I put a post out on Facebook asking you guys to let me know your favourite feel players. And the response was absolutely immense. Few hundred comments at last look from only a few hours ago, really kind of giving me a very wide range of players from, as I said, both ends of the scale, through to more shred guys, through to the acoustic end of things. So that kind of confirmed my suspicions, to be honest, that it is a little bit subjective and it is entirely dependent on what you would associate as a great feel player. A few names, not to mention any, popping up in that list that I know I definitely wouldn't associate as a great feel player. But obviously, whoever commented that very much strongly feels that, and that makes it as much of a valid opinion as mine. That's the beauty of music. But the fact that there were so very many kind of ranging styles, ranging approach, different techniques, different sounds, different speeds at which these guys generally play their music, it got me thinking of the fact that maybe it is, entirely subjective and there are no common features between feel players, and it is purely down to whoever you dig, ultimately. So I've kind of put together a little bit of a list of the most common names that kept cropping up, and we're going to break those down a little bit and try and get to the bottom as to whether there are any common features between those. Number one, undoubtedly in the list, the name that popped up most was Dave Gilmour. Incredibly fluid, incredibly sort of natural player who very much instinctively goes where the music takes him, and that is no more indicative than something maybe like Comfortably Numb, the solo in that track, which is very flowing, very fluid, very free, and a very kind of pure form of self-expression. And in that respect, I would 110% agree that Dave Gilmour is a great feel player. But totally at the other end of the spectrum then, a name that cropped up, which was really cool to see, is Keith Scott. Now, Keith Scott, not necessarily even being someone that you may be familiar with, but he's Bryan Adams' guitar player. Now, a lot of the time, Keith Scott is doing kind of cool rhythmic stuff, cool chords, riff stuff that fits into Bryan Adams' tunes, which, complements them perfectly. And in that respect, I would make an argument that Keith Scott is an incredible field player, very instinctive, very much feeling, that's that word, what the song needs. And in that respect, I would throw in someone like Mike Campbell or someone like Lindsey Buckingham, not necessarily people who are going to be making their living south of the 12th fret, but guys who know the part to play for the song and very much kind of base what they do around that. Someone like Nile Rodgers, again, typically a kind of more rhythm dude, I guess. Great songwriter, undoubtedly written more hits than you could possibly wish to shake a stick at. But 9 times out of 10, if you look at what Nile is doing, it's going to be based around some kind of maybe rhythmic patterns or a riff or some chord progressions or whatever. But again, great field player in that he's kind of really feeling what needs to be done and ultimately what he should be playing. Going back to the more kind of lead guitar side of things, we're going to be picking out guys like Stevie Ray. Derek Trucks is a great one for me. Very instinctive, very fluid in his approach. B.B. King, Jimi Hendrix, Bonnie Raitt came up. So again, we've got a lot of kind of more traditional lead guitar players. Through maybe someone like Joe Satriani, who I guess maybe fits in that kind of shred bracket a little bit more neatly. But again, Joe Satriani, for me at least, is unfairly labelled as a shred guy. Joe Satriani, for me, is a song guy that happens to use the guitar as his voice. So, as you can hopefully see, within those sort of responses that we had, there's a very wide-ranging answers, ultimately. And I don't think feel necessarily has to be something that's based around soloing. It's a case of saying the right thing in the song, and if that means not saying something, it's the kind of typical cliche Clapton quote as to whether he even did say it or not at this point, but it's the notes you don't play so much as it's the notes you do, and it's very much a case of feeling where you need to sit within the full gamut of a band. Bear in mind, a lot of these guys are playing bands with keys, with brass, with strings, all this kind of stuff going on, and really making sure that their part that they're doing complements the track perfectly. Through people, maybe more traditional shred guys like Satriani, like Dave Gilmour, that are going to be making their kind of living doing the more impressive stuff, I guess, ultimately, or the guys, stood at the front of the stage with the wind in their hair. But what I wanted to focus on in this video is that it's a little bit more of a kind of vague term, I guess, than you would initially think. What I'm going to break down now is something which, if I were so bold to maybe attach the phrase field player to myself, something that I've always aimed at is making my lead lines sound more like vocalists and less like guitar players. In that respect, I'm thinking maybe Frank Sinatra, I'm thinking Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, all those kind of great singers that really took immense pride in their phrasing and the way in which it was just, again, it perfectly complemented the song. So what I'm going to break down now is trying to make your guitar lines sound a little bit more vocal and a little bit more fluid and maybe less guitar-y, for want of a better phrase. Let's have a crack at it. So the track I'm going to use to hopefully demonstrate how I go about trying to capture that sort of slight vocal quality in my performances, I guess, is Stand By Me by Benny King. And the reason I'm going to do this is it's fairly, kind of universal. Everyone knows those first 4 bars of that melody. And even though I can't actually play you the actual track in this video because YouTube will shout at me, hopefully if I play those first 4 bars pretty straight, at least it's going to sound like Stand By Me. Now, by note definition, if you were to kind of write that out in maybe Sibelius or sheet music, that's how it would look. That is how the melody sounds. But obviously, we all know that is by no means what it actually sounds like on the record. If you play it straight like that, you've lost the inflection, you've lost the nuances, you've lost the rhythmic kind of little idiosyncrasies of it. You lost everything about it, which makes it special ultimately. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is trying to capture some of that in your guitar playing. And the best way to do that, undeniably, is just to listen to the track. You'll try A, that you're trying to replicate, or B, just listen to great vocalists in general and start trying to sort of preserve or emulate some of those subtle kind of nuances in your playing. So that first line. Obviously, Benny King doesn't sing it like that in any respect. I think if you take a listen to it, he sort of slides up to that first note, or in this case, bends. So straight away, you're getting a little bit more of a kind of vocal fluidity about it. And again, coming off to a little bit of vibrato. Again, you don't want it to be, because that's not how Benny King's vibrato sounds, and it wouldn't be particularly in keeping with the track. Again, it's about being sort of sympathetic to what you're trying to play to. Second line, again, is a good example. If we play that entirely straight, as the notes dictate, it would be... But obviously, again, he doesn't sing it like that. You're going to be bending up to that third note. A couple of ways of doing this, again, not necessarily specific to the record itself, but just trying to give it that sort of vocal freedom. You can either hammer back onto your 12th fret, or maybe slide back up to your 12th fret and give it that kind of slight sort of semitone. Again, it's a very vocal kind of thing. You listen to any kind of great singers, and that sort of little slight semitone sort of warble will come into their singing a hell of a lot. Again, with a slight subtle bit of vibrato at the end. So thus far we have... Again, something I forgot to mention there was actually sliding off the notes. That's more of a guitar thing than a vocal thing, but, you know. Or, in fact, up. Cool. So hopefully the other thing that you're picking up here is not so much that it's just emulating the actual melody, but it's emulating the space and the sense of rhythm between it. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, it's a case of being the notes that you don't play so much as the notes you do. And if you try and transfer anything across into your soloing from this, aside from the little techniques to make it sound more like a vocalist, it's transferring that sense of rhythm and timing, giving it that sense of space and dynamics and sort of tension and release and all that kind of cool stuff to build a little bit of narrative with your solos. It makes it more interesting to the listener. It makes it more interesting for me personally when I'm, listening to myself play, which unfortunately I have to do a fair amount with Friday Fretworks. But just little subtleties like that really just build it into something that more than the sum of its parts ultimately. So from the top. Again, we've got something similar there with the third line. And again, the actual dynamics with which you play the note. If you listen to a great vocal performers, not every note is sung, or not every word, I should say, is sung at the same dynamic as the one before. There are emphasis, much like a conversation where you put emphasis on certain elements of the conversation. Hopefully you get what I'm pointing at. Emphasize certain notes. In a roundabout way, emphasize certain words. So that last note there with the vibrato was much softer than the three that kind of come before it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that word or that note. It can be whichever one you kind of choose, to be honest. As long as it's relevant and as long as it works, it's entirely, self-expression. So again, we're using some of those vocal techniques to finish off the passage and just give it that sort of, as I said, I keep using the word fluidity, but that really is what it is for me. And it just takes it from a level of being an entirely guitar performance where there are so many covers on YouTube where guys just learn the melody note for note and then apply the kind of same old slightly tired guitar tricks, in my opinion, to the vocal melody. And it sounds, at this point, to me, it sounds a little bit passé, a little bit cliched and a little bit boring. I think there's a reason which, such great vocalists, Ella Fitzgerald or Frank Sinatra or someone like Benny King, for example, Sam Cooke, all those guys are held in such high esteem, is that their phrasing and their timing and their rhythm and their just everything about their performances was absolutely impeccable. And that's kind of where the magic lies for me, to be honest, and that's why I spend most of my days listening to great vocalists as opposed to great guitarists. So, one more time to run over it quickly, and hopefully you can get something from this. If nothing else, think about your spacing, think about your rhythm, think about your timing in between the notes and how much chance you're giving these notes to breathe and kind of fully, enjoy their lifespan, if you will. So, going off a little bit, but hopefully the intention was there that you would kind of hear that as an extension of the melody. You could maybe hear Benny King sort of improvising that himself. That is entirely what this is about. And just, as I said, give your solo lines a little bit more space, and hopefully that then sort of transfer into hopefully being called a field player. Cheers, guys, as ever. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Friday Fretworks. I've been Chris Buck. Please just subscribe if you haven't already, and I shall see you next week for another episode. Cheers, guys. Take care.